Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor, a weekly podcast of the teaching team at High Point Church, where we talk about sermons, sermon prep, and things we wish we could say on Sunday morning. Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor. This is episode 12. My name is Nick Stoller, Associate Pastor at High Point Church. And as usual, we are surrounded by our teaching team from High Point Church. We have Pastor Mike Willis.
Hello, good to be back with you.
We have Pastor Derek Blue.
How's it going?
And we have Pastor Jack Hilligoss.
Good afternoon.
We are excited to have you guys here. We are continuing back. Actually, last week we did our Q&A, our first Q&A. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, that went over really well. We've had some good feedback back from that. Take a listen to it. Respond back to us. Let us know what you thought of our answers. If you have any questions after listening to it, you can always contact me, Nick, at highpointlw.com. And then today we're going to be talking about our new series that Pastor Jack just opened up. It is First Comes Love, Then Comes Baggage. And of course, it's a brilliant title. Yeah. And Pastor Jack, we are getting into this relationship series. And the first question I have for you is, what do you think is the reason for this series now? Why do you think this is the right thing for our church right now?
Well, it's part of the plan that we try to follow as a teaching team here, trying to make sure that we're giving the folks that attend High Point a really balanced diet. And so usually right after Easter, heading into Mother's Day, we try to focus on some aspect of family life, which sometimes it has to do with marriage, sometimes it has to do with parenting. Last year when we did Me, We, and Us, there was a lot about what does it mean to be a single Christian and just basic friendship.
Yeah.
How do you build loyal friendships with people? And those are always challenging for me, but I enjoy them, and they're usually the ones we get the greatest response to.
Right.
But I love them because it just shows over and over again how God's word is sufficient for every area of our life.
And so you started, the text that you came with was Hebrews 13 and then 4 through 5. Do you have that open? Or
I do. I got it.
Would you read that for us?
Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.
And this is all, guys, I'm going to be going into our study guide. That's available on our website at highpointlw.com. You can find that study guide there. Just search Cutting Room Floor and you'll find it. But you asked this question in the study guide. Did you hear anything in this message that was new or that made you think differently about it? And I'll open that up for you guys. Was there anything new in this message or something that maybe stuck out to you guys that you thought was right for right now that people needed to hear?
I think the whole part about how you view marriage and how you do marriage, that whole phrase just really hit home with me to make you think about, well, how do you view marriage? What do you think about when you think about marriage? And then the more important part is, how do you practice that? How do you take that home into your living room, into the bedroom, into the kitchen, in all of that, into family life, and really apply these principles? And if it doesn't start between you and your spouse, then you've got to regroup those priorities. So that really challenged me to think about that from the very beginning.
Absolutely. And then the thought, if it doesn't work at home, it doesn't work.
Right.
With one thing that stuck out is honor kind of being the backdrop behind all of it. Just honor.
Right.
And there's this idea in the cultures that I don't like the one that I picked, so I'm going to trade it in for a newer model.
Right.
And I think whenever you look at honor in this context, when we learn how to appropriately honor God, it's much easier to honor the people that live in the house with us, specifically our wives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one thing I really liked, was how you married. Your faith determines how your marriage goes.
Yeah.
How your marriage is determined by how you believe and how you allow that to actually penetrate like who you are as a person, and how that was really impactful for me, and the way you laid it out as an honorable thing that we all need to be doing. I thought that was really good. Was there anything while you were preparing that you wanted to highlight, or maybe you enjoyed highlighting during the message or wanted to say more?
Well, yeah, and we call this cutting room floor because of that. There's so much that that idea of honor, when you see it and you really begin to explore it, how central it is to how we behave ourselves as Christians in everything. So early in the message, I highlighted the fact that we Christians are called to know how to live honorable lives and treat people with honor in all of our relationships. The introductory support text that I read was the question they asked Jesus, "What's the greatest command?"
Yeah.
And he gave them two, and they're all about relationships and knowing how to love God appropriately, and then knowing how to love people appropriately. And then that feeds into part of love is honoring them.
Right.
Again, the Bible just will not leave us alone with our own definitions. These things are too important to be left in the hands of sinful human beings. So, what does honor look like in all of our relationships? I would have loved to have spent more time on that. And the other thing that pulled out for me is the idea that that idea of honoring in the book of Hebrews is all built around the idea of covenant.
Right.
And our honoring of other people is connected to the fact that we want to honor our God in our covenant relationships with Him.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that too. This is a conversation you and I have had. It was about a year or two ago, but when you think about love, the longer you're married, the longer or the easier it is to associate love with commitment, and those being almost interchangeable to some extent. And you did a great job, in my opinion. Just when toward the end of the message, you really gave a good appeal to everybody. Just stay committed.
Yeah.
Honor your covenant that you've made with the other person, because that really is what love fleshes out to be, is your willingness to keep on coming back to the table. And because if you look at how Christ loved the church, he did that. He's made it like the sacrifice is never going to go away. He's always there. He took the first step, and he's still taking it. But when we treat our relationships as if it's something we can walk away from, come back to, switch around, change out, make some changes, then that's not honor.
Yeah, and we didn't do a good job of emphasizing this like I would want to, but our text ends with that promise: "I will never leave you, I will never forsake you."
Yeah.
So our being able to count on His honoring His promises is where we find the faith to honor our promises, and marriage is a big step of faith. One of the things that I hope that I addressed well on Sunday was that marriage is an act of faith, and if you want ironclad guarantees, this is the wrong business to be in.
Yeah.
The only guarantee that you have is the one that you have in your own heart, that you're going to keep your promise. And so if you go into it with any idea that there's an escape clause built in for you, which is the way our culture sees it, our culture sees marriage as a contract, we see it as a covenant that we make before God. You're not going to make it. You're not going to last, because there's going to be too many opportunities.
Yeah.
And too many ways for you to rationalize not keeping your promise.
Absolutely. And, that was one thing that stuck out, the contract versus covenant piece of it all. And, being a person in business, and most of us, when you look at a contract, you look at it as, okay, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
How long is this thing going to last?
Right.
Yeah.
What are my options if the other person defaults on the contract?
Right. And
I think oftentimes folks go into marriage with that type of mentality. What's in it for me? What happens if what's going to cost? What happens if they default? What happens if I default? But when we look at the covenant, it immediately brings us to the covenant. What if Christ based his sacrifice upon a contract?
Right.
Many of us have violated that thing thousands of times every single day, which leads to this point, covenant. And this is, I guess, further on in this thing, but it makes me think about to love Christ like to love our wives like Christ loved the church.
Right.
Christ died. He died. And I think that a part of this is us coming to a place to where we learn how to die. Marriage will kill if you let it. It'll kill pride in you.
Right.
It'll kill ego in you if you let it, and it'll honestly sanctify you if you let it.
Right. Yeah, I love that part in your message when you kept on. You repeated it, and I enjoyed it. How you're just like, how Christ loved the church, how Christ loved the church, and that was convicting. Yeah. And I kind of actually didn't enjoy that part because I'm thinking of those times like and I mean it comes down to those simple details. And you mentioned the details, and I think that's the easy things we overlook.
Right.
Is those small things in our day to day that we just don't want to compromise on.
Right.
I'll keep my comfort at least in this area, but maybe that's the area that you need to be Christ, and you really need to die to yourself. Exactly what you're saying, but that's the covenant that we live up to, or that we need to honor.
Yeah, and the whole idea, the difference between the contract and the covenant was so powerful. Just the fact that when you look at the book of Hebrews, it's all about that, how far God was willing to go and how serious he is about this covenant that he has with you. And I know you couldn't go through and spend time on the first 12 chapters of the whole book, but you pointed out that was a lot of the teaching, and now this is some of the application in chapter 13.
Right.
And it really makes you think about, well, what is it that I'm willing to do? How far am I willing to go? So when you stopped us and said, husbands, love your wives, and you just paused there for a minute.
Right.
And we sat in silence, and it kind of made me think, as a husband, what am I doing to make sure that I love my wife that way? And on the contrary, what are those times when I fall short of that because I start wanting what I want instead of maybe what the Lord wants?
Sure.
So it made me think about that a lot. And the other part is it says that the marriage should be honored by all. Well, that's the hope there. We know that not everyone honors that, and so what should we as believers be doing to make sure that we're doing that and shining that light to a dark world?
Sure. It again, covenant is just one of the biggest pieces of theology for us, doctrine for us. I know we as a teaching team just finished a book together about the covenants, and the covenant is the framework of our entire biblical theology. I tried really quickly to put that out there. But again, the point being that this is not just for discussion in a seminary classroom. This reality, if it's true, bleeds down into every part of your life. Right. Covenant is true in your marriage. It's true. It changes everything. So God's covenant shapes the way that we approach everything. And the other part of it is, Pastor Derek mentioned that, and I think I cited just about every time in the New Testament that every time we talk about the marriage, we're taken back to the covenant in the garden. But that phrase that Paul uses, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Well, that we always get these heroic pictures. I would die for you. Well, the question is, will you live for me?
Right.
That's good.
And so when I threw that out there, then the next examples are, will you take out the garbage?
Right.
Will you fill my car with gas? Will you be a servant to me? And that's real important because our faith asks for something that is anathema to the culture. It asks for the wife to submit to the leadership of the husband in the home. Well, that's a big risk. And I said that I really wasn't trying to be funny. It got a laugh. She took a big risk when she married you. It got a laugh.
True. Yeah.
But the fact is they did. Women of faith take a big step in following Christ when they agree to marry someone, if they're going to do it biblically. And so because they take that risk, there is a resounding call for the husband to honor that by being a servant to the person he's married to.
I really enjoyed, or I really appreciated how you asked that question. Are your wives radiant? Because that's your responsibility.
Yeah, I like that. Yep.
And how husbands, we need to make our wives radiant. We are responsible to these things. Like what kind of taste do we give other people when we talk about our spouses when they're not around?
Right.
And same with the confident husband. Man, that was just resonating with me because my wife and I have had this same kind of conversation where there were points early on in our marriage where she became almost the butt of jokes for me. But it was I was doing it with like, I was elbowing her like, see, this is funny, right? We're both in this together. But then I got a rude awakening once we got home, and I realized, oh shoot, I've made some big mistakes, right? And so, but it took time for me to learn those things. But then now I have a deeper respect. But it took her being okay coming back to that table with me, and the same for me. Her willingness to trust me to lead, and really call out the places where I'm not. A part of this handout, you mentioned how the greatest thing we could do to make our country and community better is to honor the marriages. Dive into that a little bit. How you think that is true? How does that play out for us?
Yeah, I'll give you my thoughts, and I'd love to hear what everyone has to say about that. But the basic building block of every society is the marriage. And if it breaks down there, it breaks down everywhere. You simply cannot make up for people who don't keep their word, who don't keep their promises. You cannot get around that. You can't legislate around it. You can't hire enough police to take care of it. You can't spend enough money in social programs to, to amend what's going on there. And we're living that right now. The majority of children are growing up in single parent homes today. And all of the attendant problems that we have, the school systems that are failing, the crime on the streets, all of that, whether it's not simplistic, it's very profound for you to understand. If we can't be people who keep our promises, we cannot be a society. We can't hold a culture together. And the first place, the most important place that we keep our promises is I'm going to be with you, I'm going to stick with you, and we're going to raise this family together. That's good.
I immediately start thinking of what that looks like. Like you said at the end, like we're going to raise this family together. In spite of if you have, 1 kid, 7 kids, or no kids, what you do with as a family, what you agree upon and what you build your life toward, how you honor God in your relationships with each other and your friendships with other couples, with other people, your willingness to spend time, preaching the gospel, inviting people into your homes. All of these things matter, but it comes down to those, hey, what are we doing today? Those small conversations all are just an expression of what the faith and the agreement that you have as a couple is. Like what your foundation is as a couple. And even down to what my kids say when we're not around. And so I think that's literally that's what builds our communities around us are those agreements together. What do you think, Mike?
So I loved the part. It really impacted me when you talked about an example of honor, that when we see someone in military uniform, we salute them. I grew up on military bases. I'm an Air Force brat. And so everywhere we were, when my dad was with us and he saw someone of higher rank, he was commanded. He didn't have a choice. He saluted them. And you notice this because you notice the rank or the pin on their hat or on their uniform, or, and when you notice that, you have to give them a place of honor. You don't have a choice like, well, it's Tuesday, I don't feel like it, or I'm on vacation, or I'm in civilian clothes. That's Colonel Stinnett. That's Captain Yates. That's General Ortloff. You've got to salute them. And so I grew up seeing that over and over. And we have a symbol when we make vows with each other in marriage, we exchange rings. And so what if, and it made me even think about, what if I always, regardless of how I felt or what was going on, I obeyed the command that is part of the covenant to honor my wife in that way. So I know that I'm married to her. I was there June 4th, 2017, not too long ago. You married us on that day. And so we exchange rings and we still wear them. And so when I see her, do I give her that place of importance, that place of honor? And when I do that, how does that look practically? And Nick, you were talking about our kids seeing that, and I've been around you and your family and the way that your kids respect you and your wife. And so now I've got sons that are married, and they're taking this with them. And what have I taught them? And now I've got a daughter that's maybe getting married in the near future. And so what kind of man do I want her to be married to? That is all in my head. And so it better be something that I practice every day. And by the time she's standing up in front of a church and exchanging vows, it's too late to say, well, let me talk to you about this. And so I have an opportunity now. I was with our 13-year-old daughter this morning, and I started talking to her about some things just while we were in the car, because that's the time that I have with her, and it's my responsibility to teach her that. And so I'm also not only just saying that, I'm trying to model that every day with the way that I love her mom.
You know, it makes me think when you go back to the 10 words, the 10 commandments. One of those commandments, or one of the commands rather, that was given was to honor your father and mother.
Yes.
To honor. That's in the blueprint of society. God thought that it was important enough to have Moses teach that to a nation, that honor is in the building blocks, because here's what happens. It's not simply, and then he said that your days would be long upon the earth, that there's something where dishonor can cut your days off. Dishonor influences the way that you do business. It certainly impacts every relationship in your life. And it's not simply about the way that I treat you, but it's how do I honor God? Because that's if I can honor him, and I know I said this earlier, but if I can fear and honor him, then I'm better prepared. I have more capacity to honor my wife, honor my kids. And what you see in this community, I was raised by my grandparents, and I dare not say what, Derek, come here. I'm ma'am. Even today, I'm like, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. And it's not simply about them being drill sergeants, but what it was about respect. It was about honor.
Right.
It was about saying, like, we're in a generation now to where I think honor is kind of been pushed to the wayside.
Right.
But what honor does, honor opens doors for you, and dishonor closes doors.
Right.
And when we look at our societies, we look at our neighborhoods, what we see, unfortunately, there's some, there may be some socioeconomic and all of that stuff. But if you start peeling back the layers, I can promise you that one of the root causes of a lot of what we're experiencing is dishonor.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, it makes me think through I think as a husband and as a wife, we make that promise to each other, knowing, and Jack, you talked about this a little bit, knowing that there's a likelihood that it's not going to be great all the time. And one of my favorite parts that we're always going to refer back to is Pablo and Bubba. that was great, man, because you think that there's somebody out there that you met or that you had a fling with or whatever it was. Oh shoot, Pablo was the one. But then you get into it and you're like, oh shoot, no, I should have married Bubba. Like, that was great. Yeah. But I mean, really what you're doing is, when you leave your options open, you're not making a claim to anything.
Right.
And then there's nothing to honor. There's no covenant that you have.
Right.
And that's what God is instructing us to do. Like, make plain what it is you plan to do, and then honor what your commitment is. And I'm going to work out the rest in you.
Well, it comes back to the baggage that we're dealing with in this particular sermon is how you view marriage. And again, many of us take this modern romantic contract approach to marriage, whereas the Bible teaches us that marriage is a commitment. That's what it is. It is a covenant, and certainly you have physical and emotional attraction to someone, but that waxes and wanes. And by the way, that those things, I'm going to whisper this, you can feel that for other people.
Sure.
But at some point in your life, it really does come down to, I choose this person, and I'm going to keep that promise. And then what happens is it makes you holy. And I think that's where we kind of landed, is that, and I the first time I ever heard this concept is in the book that I've recommended, Sacred Marriage. Yeah. What if God designed marriage not to make me happy, but to make me holy? Yeah. And happiness, just like every other thing that happens in our Christian life, happiness comes along for the ride, but holiness is the goal. And when I learn how to love someone in a marriage relationship in a sacrificial, committed way, then it makes me holier. It makes me more Christ-like.
So you also pointed to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17. I'll read that out loud. And you're talking about properly ordered affections. And I'd love to hear more about this. So this is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17 says, show proper respect to everyone, love the brotherhood of believers, fear God, and honor the king. And this idea of properly ordered affections, I had never heard of the concept before.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to, I just want to open that up a little bit
Yeah.
and talk through it.
And I'll just tell you that's kind of it's been one of those concepts I've always seen in Scripture, but it's wonderful when somebody helps you put it into words. And so I learned this from a wonderful Reformed scholar named Doug Wilson. And then since I heard him say it, I've heard it from several other Reformed scholars that I've been reading, theologians, this concept of properly ordered affections. Again, it's something that we've believed. It's just they help me put it into words. And it's something that we had better to learn as Christians, or else we won't understand a lot of things that Christ says. So I'll stop there and let you all jump in on it. So,
I mean, you see it with Christ. That, I guess, at least that concept when he was teaching, I think it was maybe Matthew 6, he said, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. So the idea of properly ordering and prioritizing what you love. And then I think, I forget which scripture is, maybe it's Peter again that says, set your affections on things above. So I think that theme permeates throughout the scriptures, what we prioritize. And how we prioritize. If Christ is always in the front, then he helps us put everything else in its proper place.
Yeah, and it brings to mind that portion in your sermon where you mentioned how, sometimes you can let good things overrun the promises that you have. Just like you can love the church more than your wife. And that can become a big old problem. The church is a good thing,
right?
And we're called to be the church. We're called, to minister to one another. But when that overrides what your first call, what your promise is, then that becomes a problem. So is that? Am I getting that right? And then the properly ordered affections.
Yeah,
is that what
that's a part of it, sure. And we have to struggle with that all the time. So this is a real battle because our hearts get attached to a lot of things, good things and bad things. And it's easy for us as Christians to call out the bad things. In the very next verse of our text, verse 5, do not love money. Okay, now that's easy. We all understand covetousness is a disordered affection. It's an inordinate, is what we would call inordinate affection. It's a sin. Okay, but what about those natural affections that are really good?
Right.
Family, my wife, my children. Even Peter says, honor the emperor. So we as Christian people are supposed to learn how to properly show honor to the leaders of the country that we live in. There's a lot of ways that is applicable. For instance, I want to be a patriot, but my patriotism cannot overcome my love for God.
Right.
I fear God. I honor the emperor, and those are two different things, and we Christians have to keep those in order. I love my kids, but I don't love them more than my wife or my husband. So you as a husband and wife need to know how to keep your affections in order, or else you're going to have a dysfunctional home. Those kind of things.
That's really helpful.
And you know what? You said something that was I think was important. For a lot of different reasons, but on one occasion, Jesus said, if you don't hate your mother and your father,
right.
But I like how you and then you gave context to it, is that the idea is not hating them. It's when you compare the relationship with them compared to the relationship with the Lord that you have, which one has to prioritize. So, and I think that was a great way to put that.
And I think it'll come into play as we work our way through this series more, because one of the pieces of baggage we'll have to deal with is, as parents, how when our children want to do things or want us to agree with things that we know are not in keeping with God's word, how do we keep our affections ordered? We're not going to be good parents to them if we fear them more than we fear God.
Right. I'm going to bring up this other question here on number 7. You have if you are having a discussion with a person who's considering marriage, what are the first things you would tell them? Round robin, let's go.
I'm going to make Mike start.
I get to start that. Okay. It's interesting. I am getting ready to officiate a wedding for somebody in our church in a couple weeks, and when I first met with them, and they're, this is not the first marriage for this couple. And when I saw them this week after I had first met with them, I said, hey, I was going to reach out to you today if I didn't see you and just check on you. And one of them said, well, we're still together. We're still excited about getting married. And I said, well, that's a good place to start. So if you're not, then we've got other troubles to work through. But when you think about what should you do when you're considering marriage, I think it really comes down to, yeah, there's some physical attraction there, of course, and one of you mentioned that earlier, but what is the deeper attraction? What is the inner beauty that 1 Peter 3 talks about when you look at the woman that you want to spend the rest of your life with? Is she someone that values the Bible and its teachings and to follow Christ the way that you do? Do you have those discussions, or it is all about just affection and adoration and what you think she looks like? And so it comes down to this deeper level of love, in my opinion. And then think about what are your values going to be when you have kids? How are you going to decide things together? Who will be the leader when it comes to making decisions about your budget? Who's going to be the one to say, let's pray, stop and pray about this when there's a conflict going on? Who's going to be the one to say, well, we're not moving from this job or this city or this house until God tells us to? So some of those practical things, somebody has to be the leader in that. And the way that God designed the family is that we as men are those spiritual leaders. But we also have to have someone on the other side, a woman, because he did design it between one man and one woman, for her to also be willing to follow that, but also to have a voice in that relationship. And so it's about this communication aspect that you have with each other, shown out of proper respect, all by the way that you honor them. And I think it just all plays in there together.
Yeah, I think that's a good, are you willing to follow this guy? Like, are you willing to follow this guy? That's a good question, I would say. And then something that I was taught, this is by marriage counselors and people who do this stuff all the time, and they have this really good saying. It's if you've got to be sure that you're okay, not just communicating with a person, but connecting with a person.
Yes.
And I think that's been revolutionary for myself, the way that I understand. I'm not just, are you okay with becoming so connected with a person that you are one with them? Because that's what we're doing here. And if you're not willing to look through the lens of how God sees marriage and you're okay with being with that person, you might want to hesitate. You might want to start asking deeper questions about what your intentions are. And I think that's a good place. Like if you can't get to the point where you guys have those kinds of discussions, maybe marriage isn't the right next step. Maybe it's, let's have another coffee or something like that.
Yeah. Those are some great, it's not a whole lot to add to those two things. One thing I would, if I could, is deal with your stuff.
Yes.
We all come to the marriage with something. We all come with expectations that may not even be realistic. We all come to the table with the way that we were raised, our conditioning, the way that we think about things. And sometimes we bring things that are detrimental to the marriage in it because it was the way that we were raised. And what I would say is, one, and this is just not a cliche, but you have to die to yourself.
Right.
That's right.
Like you have to, you literally have to die to yourself because, in my marriage, I'm Blue. She was Everett. Blue came with a whole bunch of baggage. Everett came with their own situations. And now we're trying to come together and become one.
Right.
And that's easy to read on paper. is easy to read, but that process, it's a process of self-denial. There's a process of empathizing. There's this whole merging that has to take place. And what I would say, I guess, to kind of put a bow on my thoughts on it is be ready to die. Be ready to die to self.
That's good.
Yeah, I think a realistic assessment and a willingness to risk. So what I mean by that is one of my favorite stories, and I've used it often, is when my parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. I think you did the video.
Yeah.
In the interview, my Uncle Jack and Aunt Carolyn celebrated at the same time. Both of them celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, married the same year, and we interviewed them. And what was it? What was the secret to your relationship? And when they got to how did you survive? How did you make it? I think the question, why do you think you made it? And Dad gave a big flowery answer, and Mom just looked at the camera and said, well, we fought. And that was it. I think you tried to get more out of her. And
No, she said a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, she fought a lot.
But I've always respected that answer because it was honest. And so I guess I want to say to a young couple, this is going to be a fight, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
So that's the realistic assessment, is that you're going to fight, you're going to have hard days, but it's worth it. And then the other thing is, you've got to be willing to take the risk at some point. What's killing us, one of the things we said on Sunday was that we honor marriage by pursuing it, because God created marriage and he wants most of us to get married. Not all of us. God has a unique, plan for a few of us, but the predominant majority, we're supposed to be looking to get married and raise godly families. And so at some point, you're going to have to jump off the high dive with someone. And if you sit around and overanalyze and over-speculate and try, and if you think you can get it all worked out to where you're going to have a perfect relationship, you'll never get married.
True.
No matter how much caution you take on the front end, no matter how much dating you do, no matter how much psychoanalysis you go through, when you get married, you're going to find out that there are things you're going to have to fight through. So I would just say, I want to say to a lot of young people, jump in. I mean, I know that sounds crazy,
Right.
but at some point you get into the paralysis of analysis on people.
Right.
At some point you're just going to have to grab somebody's hand and say, okay, are we both committed? Let's go.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and it's scary. But I'll say this too, even to people who've been married even for a few years, if you haven't started getting into stuff, you might really want to have some conversations with each other.
Yeah.
That's right.
Maybe ask some deeper questions. Maybe even sit down and say, you know what? Let's not turn on the TV and let's put our phones away and let's really talk about some stuff. Because I think there's something that's nice to think, man, like Ashley and I, we got along so well together for such a long period of time. And it's not like we don't now, but I'm saying it took a while for us to be willing to let our guards down and really get into some of the deeper issues of ourselves. But what you guys are saying is great, but that's it. We have to be willing to open ourselves up and be vulnerable in deeper ways. And that's where you truly start becoming one.
You made me think of something. I want to say it real quick too, is that I think I said this towards the end, is you need to be a part of a bigger community.
Oh yeah, that was good.
That's another piece of advice I would tell young couples today is don't try and do this on your own. There's no man on the planet that's going to meet all your needs, and there's no woman on the planet. And if you place that burden on anyone, you're going to fail. So get involved in a community of faith.
All right, so as we close up, we're going to go deeper. Pastor Jack has given us one resource. It is Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. Tell us about that, Pastor Jack.
It's just a great book. I read it the first time about a decade ago, and it was the reason it grabbed me was so much of what I had read, while it was helpful, was technique driven.
Okay.
And technique cut off from a theological understanding is cut flower marriage. And this guy, Gary Thomas, takes you back to the reason why. And he does it better than he did it at that point better than anyone I had ever read before. And when you understand that, then the techniques begin to make some sense. So it's a great book. I think the subheading is, what if God designed marriage to not to make us happy, but to make us holy? So I would recommend it to anyone.
I'll
Awesome.
add to that real quick.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
We have, over the years, there's like a 6 or 7 week study with that book. And we've led that here at High Point Church several times. I've led it several times, and it's just a great resource. So if you're looking to get some friends together to talk about it, that's a good place to start.
All right, y'all. This has been episode 12. We really appreciate you guys listening. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Nick at highpointlw.com. And fellas, thank you again for being a part of the,
Always
great.
fun.
of the episode.
This is good.
Great.
And we will see you guys next week. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Cutting Room Floor. If you have questions about High Point Church or want to find out more, go to highpointlw.com.